Today I'm going to talk to you about the relationship between militarism and video games. Specifically, what I want to focus on is a genre of video game called the first-person shooter video game, because I believe that the video game serves as a powerful synthetic play space that subverts as well as enhances political and social narratives of conflict and nationhood. So today I'm going to narrate oh my God, okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going to narrate a sort of a dialogue that encompasses three spheres of formation, or what I believe to be three important sites of learning. And the first one is play space. Here I've got my I feel like a DJ here. The first one is play space. And so what I want to talk to you in this idea of play space, which takes a semi-autobiographical thread. As a child, I was growing up during the Cold War, so I want to tell you how I interpreted my world of play, which is an imaginary world, to the real world, actual world that was going on during the Cold War. And then what I want to do is I want to link that to the notion of games. In the 50s and 60s, games became a very important part of the cultural and social zeitgeist of the day. We all have heard about the war games of Rand and the notorious zero-sum war games. Well, today I think we see a resurgence of this idea of games, or this emphasis on games. So I wanted to talk about this notion of game space. And then finally I want to talk about how game space turns into a virtual space of antagonism known as battle space, which is the sphere or the theater of where many modern wars are fought today. But first, I would like to start this presentation with a video clip from a game that I will be talking about. I'll be focusing on two specific games. One is called Kuma War, and the other one, which is called America's Army. Now, the difference basically between Kuma War and America's Army is that Kuma War, well, both of them are free, but one is a commercial game that you play online, and the other one is a game that has been sponsored by the US government through taxpayer dollars to the sum of $12 or $13 million. It's a very popular game. It's freely downloadable. But I want to start off by showing you a clip from Kuma War.
Hello and welcome. I'm Mantello, and this is Kuma War. Saddam Hussein, the butcher of Baghdad, has been captured. Here's how it went down. From the headlines to the front lines, we put you there. Introducing Kuma War, an intense boots-on-the-ground experience of actual news events occurring around the world right now. Real-world news. Real-world games. Subscribe to Kuma War, and each month you'll get playable missions delivered to your computer. Intense episodic play based on the very same stories rocking the world today. Kuma's news team takes you through the top stories with expert analysis, including Major General Thomas L. Wilkerson, and the critical intel you need to understand a world in crisis. After we report it, you play it in single player and multiplayer. You devise the tactics. You make the hard choices. We create the news as it happened. We make it as you think the action should have gone down. With Kuma, you experience the toughest fighting of the war. You are the 4th Infantry Division capturing Saddam. You are the 10th Mountain Division hunting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Wherever the war takes our forces, we'll put you there. On the ground and in the thick of it. Accurate and authentic. Intense and immersive. Constantly updated to be timely and real. February 2004. Gaming grows up. Go to KumaWar.com and download your free trial. This is Kuma War.
Okay, so that's one clip. I have several clips I'm going to show you tonight. What I want to focus on in the first-person shooter is another specific subgenre of first-person shooter, which is the special operations or special ops as a multiplayer online game, as a network tactical subgenre, which involves team or squad-based decision-making. These two types of games I find are important because not only one, do they show the ways in which actual political doctrines are constructed in order to validate military force as a legitimate tool of foreign policy, but they also accurately show how our wired world controls and organizes information. My talk today does not concern an empirical debate over the effects of video games on violent behavior. Rather, my talk focuses on a discourse of representation, because I believe that first-person shooter games desensitize us to the mediated nature of modern warfare by not only romanticizing high-tech, septic art of digitized killing, but reinforces a technology of war that shows, for many reasons, a sense of superiority of Western ability and purpose. Why I will suggest that the FPS game, that's the short form for first-person shooter, is a mindless form of repetitive entertainment as well as masculine empowerment. They also serve as participatory middle grounds, which promote a world based on perpetual wars that add a necessity to perpetual wars that imply a necessity that adds stability and safety to our world, as well as military themed video games which reinforce mainstream media's negative representations of the other. Now, film and TV are also popular forms of mainstream media, but they are very different from video games. Firstly, film and TV are constructed as 2D representations where the spectators have to assume a very passive role in watching or observing the narrative line, whereas in video games, spectators become player, character, and author in an immersive 3D representation in which they can explore and manipulate. Now, unlike film and TV, network video games are also virtual communities that, like their material world counterparts, serve as agents of social formation that links identity or self-identity to community and therefore also to political beliefs. At their very core, network first-person video games are procedural systems of protocol, the code of conduct in society, but also the set of rules for communication through informatic networks. Now, so how do video games do this? Well, first-person shooter games, as you saw up there, sort of conflate the authenticity of digital combat to the legitimacy of political agendas. But most importantly, these types of video games use the binaries of gameplay sorry. Sort of got ahead of myself there. So this idea of using the binaries of gameplay to polarize difference, and that becomes player versus opponent, but also to simplify political conflicts, good versus evil, as well as to flatten social cultural identity, Middle Eastern, terrorist, Arab, Muslim. Now, these games like Kuma War and America's Army presuppose that the reality of the war game, or the reality that's inside the video game, is exactly the same as the reality in the real world. And so by playing the game, the gamer experiences a sort of an interactive CNN-like world, a way in which to understand world events. And so these games frame conflicts and cultures and people in ways that promote specific agendas, social and political. And this is done by weaving this notion of real people and real events with this idea of objective journalism. Now, first-person shooters are part of the new media battleground. a form of fourth-generation warfare that is not just about subduing the enemy's mind through cerebral combat, but also the psychological smart bombing of its own people. U.S. government-funded games such as America's Army and their recruiting theme park spin-offs, which I'm going to talk about later, exploit play to further frame a justification for the militarization of neoliberal capitalism as perpetual wars of necessity. In computerized war games, the player transforms themselves not only into modern cyborg soldiers, but also into patriotic crusaders whose goal is to liberate failed nations, stabilize states of concern, protect national security interests, but mostly to vanquish pre-modern evil, which invariably has a hard time embracing ideas of globalization. Now, there are three common types of military first-person shooter games. Ones that recycle World War I or World War II narratives. The second one, Middle Eastern conflicts. And the third one is struggles against the war on terrorism. In the last two, these games create worlds and narratives that continually exploit and cliches of the Arab and Muslim world, recycling what Edward Said has called Orientalist constructions of the primitive other. Now, this is done through an insistence on medieval period architecture, a lack of modern Western buildings, perpetual conflicts and combat, also signified by war debris littered in the streets. The cityscapes in these video games are marked as primitive spaces which show no sign of ordinary life or ordinary people, but instead are portrayed as a deadly labyrinth filled with ruthless, ill-trained enemies. Now, the Special Ops Forces soldier thus poses as the necessary solution, the civilizing instrument of modernization and the democratic equalizer, through which his superior technological hardware, not to mention gutsy macho marine bravado, will vanquish this pre-modern evil and liberate the country. In games dealing with war on terror, this idea of terror becomes a permissible gameplay activity as it speeds up data transmission, thereby saving American lives. As Guy Debord states in his writings on the Society of Spectacle, torture is a necessary alternative to terrorism. Now, I think I'm going to slip away from this for a second and discuss my experiences as a child digesting this world of play and war. I grew up in the 60s, and in the 60s, it was a time of many races, many games. There was the arms race and there was the space race. Well, I come from a small town in northern Ontario, and this town is located exactly where the Great Lakes converge. It's a small town called Sault Ste. Marie. Well, on the other side of Sault Ste. Marie, that's a kind of a magnified picture there. On the other side is the United States. Well, about 30 miles from there, there was a U.S. Air Force base called Kitcheloe, and this base was responsible for housing the B-52s that would fly every month or every 2 months to the due early warning line. These were the B-52 bombers carrying those big atomic bombs. So I remember quite well the times when these bombers would fly overhead, because you could hear them coming from miles away. And I knew quite well about what their intention was, because I had been exposed to many different propaganda films or documentaries by the US government talking about the horrors of nuclear war. Some of the names you might know, like Duck and Cover. It's a story about Tommy the Turtle, who, whenever he sees the flash, he has to duck and cover. And so I was well aware of the horrors of nuclear warfare and this strange concept known as mutually assured destruction. So also I had been sort of exposed to films like Failsafe and On the Beach and of course my favorite, Dr. Strangelove, which sort of told about the terror and insanity of nuclear war, the war without a winner, the annihilation of both sides. So as a child, my greatest fear mirrored that paradox of the Cold War. The first one being that the bomb would go off and I would no longer be able to play. And then the second one is that the bomb wouldn't go off and I would finally become an adult and have to surrender this wonderful, intense experience of play. So, well, by the way, yes, Dr. Strangelove, after Herman Kahn, the man who was responsible for the zero-sum games or the on thermonuclear destruction, the book. So, like most kids, I saw the world through this idea of play. Play was the single most important activity in my life. Most children see their life through play. Play is, by nature, something that is very important to the formative experiences of our life. But this idea of play simply cannot be cultivated on its own. It requires its own space, complete with its own unique borders. And we call this place play space. Well, play space is, as I said before, it's the space where children learn the skills needed for survival. Critically, the play space is sort of the sphere of formation that rests upon this idea of a confluence between the actual real world, chaotic real world, and the ordered imaginary. And it's through this formative space that children learn many things. Now, play space generally is structured through gender. Girls' play spaces tend to be near or close to the home, and partly that is due to child rearing and activities with becoming a mother. Now, boy play spaces, on the other hand, are linked to spaces set far away from the family residence, and partly this is due to the fact that boys want to get away from the controlling influence of the mother. This idea of independence is important for the male child to sort of construct his notion of masculinity. So these spaces for boys are always ones of exploration and conquest, and we see this throughout the world in all cultures. Well, my most memorable play space was simply a place called the bush. And the bush was this large, undeveloped piece of land behind my house. But it was more than just an untamed piece of land with trees and a winding ravine. The bush was my fictional universe where I played out my fantasies and dreams, often inspired by things I saw on television or read in the comic books. Now, we spent long hours in the bush, riding bikes, collecting bugs and frogs, building tree forts. But the thing that we liked to do most in the games, or in the bush, was play games. Games are, by definition, the organized and structured pursuits of play. Games teach us things like agency, the power of action, and mastery, the ability to gain control and skill. Games are also woven into the spirit of our society. We can see their influence in the arts, philosophy, politics, even in ancient and etiquette rules of modern warfare. Games are central to our life. Slogans like, go for the gold, give it your best shot, the deck is stacked. I think you understand what I mean. All these terms are sort of woven into the spirit of who we are. Now, I played a lot of games in the bush, but the game I preferred to play most was a game called War. I and my friends would divide up into two sides and we'd stake out our territories, each one rehearsing war scenarios like the ones we saw on television. Now, growing up in the 60s, it was almost impossible to escape narratives of military conflict, either the actual ones from the war in Vietnam, or the fictional ones that were recycled from World War II movies. Movies like Audie Murphy, Dirty Dozen. These were all films that I internalized as a child, and I would watch these films. And of course, supporting all these different shows were a barrage of toys that were available, and I'll show them to you now, commercial, war toys, which were quite popular when I was growing up. I'll show you a commercial from one of them. Sorry. Here we go.
Best equipped boys in the field. All the equipment you need for fun and excitement in the Gung-Ho Commando outfit by Mars. Just look at all the things you get. There's a battle map and direction-finding compass, a cap-shooting automatic with gun belt and holster, a helmet, a canteen, complete mess kit and poncho. You get a cap-firing Gung-Ho hand grenade. And look here, this flashing battery-powered machine gun with moving ammo belt shoots rapid-fire bullets. There's a real-looking walkie-talkie, too, and the field pack. You get non-com stripes, medals and battle ribbons, even dog tags. It's all for fun and excitement. Get the outfit with all the equipment you need. The Gung-Ho Commando outfit. By Marks.
And I'll play you one more.
Fighting man from head to toe, on the land, on the sea, in the air. G.I. Joe attack! Boom, boom! G.I. Joe, big battle! There, there! Terrific battle! Terrific equipment to have a battle with. When you get G.I. Joe and the authentic G.I. Joe equipment, you'll have the greatest realism, the greatest fun you ever had in playing soldiers. Box after box of authentic uniforms and equipment, so you can change your G.I. Joe soldier into a camouflage Marine ready for battle, a Navy frogman with complete scuba suit and inflatable life raft, an Air Force pilot with high-altitude helmet and air vest. Get G.I. Joe and get G.I. Joe equipment, so you can set up exciting battle action whenever you want. Remember, only G.I. Joe is G.I. Joe.
Okay. I think you get the picture. Anyways. So, I watched a lot of shows, but my favorite war show of all time was a show called Combat. And Combat was one of the longest running World War II dramas. It went from 1962 to 1967, actually longer than the World War II existed. But, and it probably would have went longer if it wasn't for shifting attitudes in America towards US military aggression. By the late 60s, Combat's overtly patriotic message had fallen out of sync with the growing anti-war feeling mounting in Vietnam, though Combat strangely resurfaced almost 30 years later as a popular video game in Japan. Entitled Sergeant Saunders, the game was marketed by Nintendo primarily to primary school kids. Now, so this theme of conquest in games and battle have been a major part of play since games were created. Games like Weiqi, 4,000 years old, or early forms of chess, which go back several thousand years ago, to contemporary battle games such as Risk, Stratego, all these games sort of mirror the strategies and the actions of military conquest. All these games use the boundaries of the game board as game space and also as the battlefield. So, not surprisingly, then, the video game, which is now the most recent cultural media form, carries a large majority of titles whose gameplay simulates war and conquest. If we trace back video games from some of their most recent titles to their very beginning, it's quite easy to see that the narratives of gameplay are very much a reflection of the social and political processes of the day. And as a result, in turn, the fears and phobias that get repressed in our culture. And yet, through video gameplay, we can control and express them through the coherent and stable world of algorithmic play. Now, we can see this in games such as the game Splinter Strike, based on Tom Clancy's novels, which talks very much about post-9/11 ambiguity of terrorism, torture, and conspiracy. Or we can look at America's first high-tech celebrations of battle in Iraq in Desert Storm, or in 1990, the submerged tensions, I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry, the submerged tensions of nuclear war, or in the 1987 game Rambo, which sort of mirrors the hard body aesthetic and aggressive foreign policy of Reaganism in the late 80s. Or we have the 1982 Communist Mutants from Space, which deals with the threat of ideological invasion by vodka-drinking communists, aliens. Or we have in 1980 the game Missile Command, which reflects very much the anxieties over the stalled ICBM treaties in the mid-70s and the massive nuclear escalation that went on then. So, and if we go back to the very first game in 1960, around 1962, we come to a game known as Space Wars. Now, Space Wars was created shortly after the launch of Sputnik 1, and it was in very many ways inspired by the space race, which we all know today is synonymous for the arms race. And so it's not too much of a stretch to say that the game is a computational metaphor for the technological, ideological, cultural sort of rivalry between the superpowers during that day. Now, its 5 developers were 20-something MIT graduates who divided their time between the research lab and the cinema house watching Atomic Age classics, monster movies, Godzilla monster movies. And in all these films, the narratives embrace this circuitous logic of the Cold War. The bomb creates the monster, but also the bomb is the solution to the problem. The avatars used bear a strong resemblance to the Americans' Red Rocket missile, and the other one, the Wedge, bears a strong resemblance to the Russian Semyorka. As I said before, the developers of these games were young 20-something students. They watched a lot of horror movies, and as I said before, these horror movies sort of have the same sort of central narrative where the bomb creates the problem, but also the bomb is the way that we can destroy the problem. Now, the most interesting thing about Space Wars was it was a game that was created without a formal agenda. It was not part of any official research project. It was simply a play space constructed by 4 graduate students in their leisure moments, taking a break from building the first true thinking machines. Yet, Space War prophetically signaled the erosion of boundaries between the imaginary, the synthetic, and the actual material, the literal and the literary, actual military tactical missions and tactical war games. Space War in many ways symbolizes the early military-industrial complex as a parallel universe of divergent yet convergent operating systems, an ambiguous play space cultivating the destructive science of war, but also the transformative tools for fostering a new collective consciousness, a play-oriented culture. So, increasingly, video games and synthetic worlds serve as both sites and signifiers for the paradigm shifts that we're now experiencing in our society. These shifts involve not only the erasure of the borders between the actual real and the imaginary virtual, but also ways in which notions of gender, race, and nationhood are being manufactured and constructed in our progressively networked society. In the digital age, images are no longer two-dimensional representations that we are able to seduce us. Video games and artificial worlds offer us what is known as a form of procedural representation, meaning we have the ability to control and manipulate these worlds. These 3D experiences are now stronger and more influential than anything we've experienced before in the history of images, games, and play. And today, video games are becoming the predominant cultural form of mainstream media. I think last year they reached sales of over $30 billion. As such, they play a powerful role in shaping our comprehension and understanding of the world by not only constructing various representations, but allowing us to participate in them. These 3D representations are more powerful than other types of 2D representation because they are much more natural to us. We were born into a 3D world, not a 2D world. 2D representation was something that we learned to accept as a matter of consequence. So, these 3D worlds, these games, are actually not unlike those experiences offered to society over 200 years ago by an almost forgotten 19th century media called the panorama. First created by an artist by the name of Robert Barker in 1797, the panorama was a huge, immense 360-degree building that housed oval paintings that encompassed the whole side of it. Now, the panorama was not only the first mass media spectacle, but it was the first mass media experience to offer an immersive experience in a 3D world. Like the video game, the panorama was a mass media that captured the social consciousness of its time. Now, the 19th century was not only a time of the expansion of physical borders, but it was also an expansion of intellectual ones. This idea of broadening one's horizon, expanding your sights, travel opens the mind. These sayings all originated at this time. Like cyberspace today, the panorama, when people went into it, when they experienced it, they said they would leave and they would say the same words of disembodiment that people sort of refer to surfing the net now, which is transported, carried away, and teleported. Now, the panorama was very popular. In fact, this guy was so impressed by his first panorama experience that upon leaving, he was said to have uttered to his generals, "We must speak to the eyes." So Napoleon was quite a smart man. Not only was he a great military strategist, but he was also a master of propaganda. He understood the persuasive potential that the panorama could offer. So shortly after his visit, he commissioned a series of panoramas to be built around Paris in dedication to his victories. But as we all know, the things did not go too well for Napoleon in 1812. So he would not be able to see his dream come true. But in 100 years later, I hope I have the website. We can see his dream did finally come true. If the link is here. Okay. I think I'll skip that one. Anyways, it's going to be too difficult to get to that one. Anyways, let me go forward. So, you can see his panorama in the hamlet of Lyon in Belgium, but it's not dedicated to any of his victories, but unfortunately to his defeat. The Battle of 1812, Waterloo, is housed in this panorama, and it still stands today. Now, the panorama is the father of the mass media spectacle, but it's also, in a sense, the father of the first massive online game. Like the panorama, the massive online game, many of them teach people how to reorganize the modern visual experience through persistent worlds of exploration and community. Now, there were three types of panoramas that were constructed in the 19th century. One was about landscape, the other one was religious moments, and the third one was battle. Out of the 38 remaining panoramas in the world today, 70% of them remain dedicated to images of battle. So, like the panorama, besides Wii Fit, the most popular video games today are games that revolve around narratives of conquest and conflict. And the narrative is usually the same: journey to a far-off exotic land, extracting its wealth and natural resources, and killing or subjugating anyone who gets in your way. So, this term, first-person shooter, it's a generic term, and it's used to describe a form of military gunplay where the player assumes the viewpoint of a main character who's usually holding a gun. The idea is to be able to simulate the perspective that's needed to accurately fire a weapon in combat. Now, the first-person shooter is sort of a confluence between the primitive and the modern. The primitive being the ability to engage in acts of violence or aggression, to use aggression as a problem-solving methodology. And the modern is the computer-assisted disembodiment of human consciousness that invites the player to explore and to control an artificial world. Now, the first-person shooter is often allows the person to switch between first and third person, but the POV is the preferred mode utilized in the game because it enhances gameplay experience. Now, the term special ops is taken from a much older military lexicon, and it describes small clandestine operations undertaken to achieve significant military or political objectives. In its modern incarnation, the special ops soldier utilizes technology, stealth, and teamwork to address shifting realities of asymmetrical hostility played out in between non-combatants in metropolitan areas. Most importantly, true to its real-world counterpart, the first-person hero special ops player is the next-gen warrior, augmented with the latest high-tech technology, global positioning system, night vision goggles, video camera, thermal sight scoping, computer-assisted connection to overhead surveillance drones. The special ops soldier is the ultimate cyborg warrior, the wired poster boy for modernity, the zenith of martial functionality. So, I'd like to talk to you specifically about one game right now, and that game is, two games actually. The first one is Doom, and then its spin-off, which was Marine Corps Doom, and then the second one is Half-Life and its spin-off Counter-Strike, and then how that relates to America's Army. Well, in 1959, Robert Heinlein wrote Starship Troopers as a response to a minor wave of anti-nuclear opinion stirring in the US during the Cold War. In his futuristic story, the world is a unified nation, and it's at war with a race of alien bugs. In this unified nation, suffrage is based on civilians' active contribution to military combat. Now, the two most famous network games actually originated from these similar type of science fiction narratives. One of them, called Counter-Strike, which was created in 2000, evolved from a science fiction narrative. But in this time, the bad guy is no longer cast as the bad guy is other is no longer cast as bad robot or alien, but manifests himself as a terrorist or insurgent. Now, in games like Counter-Strike, not only do the players select the type of mission they would like to do, bomb planting or bomb defusal, hostage rescue, or simply hostile engagement, but they also select the geographical setting of the battlefield. Invariably, these locations take place in sort of indistinct Middle Eastern nations. These spaces do not belong to a post-apocalyptical future, but rather to a dystopian present. More obliquely, nations who have chosen not to accept a certain agenda. The battle zones then take place are marked as ancient, barbaric world embroiled in timeless, never-ending conflict, a culture spawned on war and death. Games like Counter-Strike provide definition and depth do not provide definition and depth to this narrative, but rather focus on uncertainty of intention and unmarked identity through generic portrayal. This unintentional naming of sides yet specific framing of regions reflects the greater geopolitical game and militaristic ideology which pretexts them. Counter-Strike is very political in its apolitical narrative, for it compresses ethnicity, religion, and political purpose into a single frame. Now, I'd like to play you a video from another game. And this is the one that I'm going to focus on for the rest of my talk. It's called America's Army.
This product really is unprecedented. It's the only official U.S. Army game, and it's benefiting from this tremendous level of support from the Army. We've had Special Forces officers come to secret level studios, some of them are game experts because there's a lot of gamers in the Army.
I probably spend an inordinate amount of my paycheck on games, and so I want to play games that are realistic. In Special Forces, we train people in military tactics. We teach them how to do this. When I went to secret level, that was a big part of what I was doing with them.
We really put a lot into weapons distances, proper position, covering, concealment. When you look over an iron sights of a weapon, it looks realistic to what an actual rifleman sees.
It's really the highest level of authenticity of any game out there.
Many of the sports games today, Rise of the Soldier has character progression that's built on skill points.
The skill system in Rise of the Soldier is very unique because it allows the players to customize their character and gear it towards the way he or she likes to play the game.
The career mode really is a depiction of the rise of the soldier in terms of individual accomplishment, training, education. No other game can do that because no other game is an official U.S. Army product. The Rise of the Soldier title is really an entirely new experience. The console game will have a very robust single-player experience, strong artificial intelligence, career mode, skill points. It's an entirely different package.
I knew that was going to scare away some people. I realize, yeah. But I'm kind of getting to my point soon. I kind of took a massive leap through some stuff because I think this is more topical. In this last part, I just want to focus on this very special game and its very recent mutations. That trailer is actually from a very old, maybe 2006 version that was marketed for Xbox, specifically for Xbox. Now with America's Army, you can only play it by going online. And as I talk about this game, I'd like to show you the game, because I've got too many. It's coming up. This is the new one, America's Army 3.0. Okay. In 2000, the America's recruitment was at its very lowest that it had been in its history. The war in Iraq had become very unpopular. And after seeing the quantifiable success of military first-person shooter games, specifically one which was called Doom, which was then modified by its own players to create a game called Military Doom. Doom was, as I said before, much like a science fiction narrative based on Mars. It was a Marine who goes to Mars, sort of a cross between Aliens and Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, kind of somewhere in between. But anyways, these players modified the game, and modifications, for those of you who are not familiar, are packs that are given, they're sort of open source packs that are are freely distributed to the players so that they can change the cosmetics of the game. They can change the look of a character, the environment, or the sounds without having to endanger the game engine. And so what these players did, who were actually programmers working for the US military, is they changed the Martian landscape into an Iraqi landscape. They changed the Martian monsters into Iraqi soldiers, and they changed the Martian dungeons into foxholes and dugouts. Now, this game was extremely popular, and what prompted the US military officials to sort of investigate it further was that they saw that this game was being networked. And so what it was doing, it was building an unlikely bridge between two very separate people, civilian gamers and military gamers. And during this sort of virtual community building, military personnel were sharing experiences, and not only to their military experiences, but to their lives. So it created a sense of bonding. And so what U.S. Army officials thought that it might be interesting to use this as a form of simulation. Before this video game, the military was in a process of trying to downsize their budgets, because by the late 80s, early 90s, it was evident that the fall of communism in the Soviet Union was taking place. The Soviet Union was breaking down. And also there was an era of global transparency with this era of globalization. And so military contractors who were connected to the military all of a sudden now had to be more transparent about their dealings. So the American Army was looking for cheap substitutes for their simulation. Prior to the early 80s, simulation, a helicopter or a jet would run 3 or 4 times more than the actual vehicle that they were training on. And also these types of simulators were claustrophobic and uncomfortable. And so what they saw in these first-person shooter games is they saw an incredible interest by their own soldiers in playing these games. And so they thought that, why not create our own game? And so what America's Army does, which separates it from all the other competitors, is this notion of authenticity. And this is how it's marketed as America's Army is the real deal. Not only authenticity through authorship, but authenticity down to every detail of Army life. So this authorship is, so in order to actually play the game, you have to go to boot camp, virtual boot camp. You have to train in boot camp. And if you pass boot camp, then you can start to you start to learn military tactics. And once you learn military tactics, then you can join in gameplay. So this game is also sort of a collaboration. The military hired professional gamers, but the idea is that it's sort of supervised under the guidance of seasoned military professionals. Now, beside its authenticity, the other great selling point is it's free. It's downloadable. It doesn't cost anything. Also, this idea of networking becomes very important, and it creates an unlikely interaction between civilian gamers and military gamers. But more than just simple gameplay, America's Army creates a play space where soldiers and civilians not only compete, but also play with each other. And so they form friendships and they share real combat experience. Now, one of the taglines of the earlier one was America's Army, every detail counts. And so this idea of detail and authenticity of combat becomes very important. So where political narratives of Counter-Strike thrived on ambiguity of place, it's just the opposite with America's Army. In this America's Army, you become a player, but you don't actually even become a generic player. You assume the role of a real combat hero. And this is the page, Real Combat Hero. And your job is to fight against Iraqi insurgents in northern Iraq, or Taliban forces in Afghanistan, or even terrorists who are plotting to destroy oil pipelines in Alaska. These are the missions that you take. Now, this America's Army, it can, as I said before, only can be played by going to the site, which if you start to explore the site, you'll find that it also doubles as a virtual recruiting office. Every page is linked to www.GoArmy, which is the Army's official virtual recruitment site. So the player can sign up for America's Army, the game, but they can also register for America's Army, the real-life counterpart. Now, these website links serve as a vital function and component of the real-world situation. And I'll just click on one here, which is the Real Heroes. It doesn't want to let me do that now. Testing. So this is the Real Heroes page, and as I said before, when you play a character, you can choose from one of these characters. Now, also with one of these characters, when you choose a character, you find out many things about him. You can go to their personal blog. You can find out through. You can share. You can chat with them online. You can find out all sorts of information about their public service, their records of accomplishment, their medals, their skill badges, and also you can be invited to their own kind of America's Army Facebook. Now, this idea of the real hero is very important because the first-person shooter was originally conceived as a faceless POV. So by superimposing a real person with a real, authentic history, the player is given the imaginary fodder for identification and purpose, which is a crucial element in gameplay immersion. The ability to feel that you are that hero in a real battle, fighting for your country and your life. Now, this Real Heroes blog, as I said before, also has a real-time chat function. So if one of these guys is online, you can talk with them. Other pages in this site, such as squad roles, sort of describes the specific hierarchy and responsibilities of each member to a unit. And the 7 core values page inducts us into the ideology of military life. But also the 7 core values page also works into how the game is scored. So this idea, for example, of selfless service. The definition is put the welfare of the nation, the army, and your teammates above your own. And in terms of how that relates to scoring, it means going in harm's way to assist your teammates. Now, the US Army page is also a recruiting page that's on there. But what I'd like to do, because I think I kind of want to stop soon, is I want to mention to you this idea of how this site or this game sort of transformed itself. 2 years ago, what happened is that they saw the popularity, the American Army saw the popularity of this game. And so what they decided to do is to create a virtual experience, but in a very collective sort of interactive way. And so what they did is they started a mobile virtual recruiting theme park, which travels as of 2 years ago around the States to public fairs, exhibition, things like NASCAR races. And what it does is it gives people a chance to experience meeting authentic people, but in a sort of a very physical form. I'll show it to you here.
My name is Sergeant Long. This is the last briefing that you'll get before you go into battle.
Okay, so this is sort of an amusement theme park, but it's sort of built around the idea of America's Army. It was created about 2 years ago, and as I said before, it sort of travels around America to various parts of where large-scale public events take place. It's a huge exhibition hall. It's about over 20,000 square feet. And it builds on the same premise as America's Army by mixing this notion of imaginary with the real, the authentic with the fictional. But when the participants who actually enter this exhibition enter inside, they meet with real soldiers who provide them with orientation, missions, and recruitment briefing. Now, afterwards, the soldiers or the virtual players, participants, they have a choice of either playing on sort of game consoles, or they can sign up for missions on tactical simulators. These are either Apache helicopters or Humvee vehicles. And so what they do is they participate in these simulator rides. Now, these simulator rides are sort of mesh the idea of 3D graphical realism on high-resolution monitors with the jarring physical sensation of mechanical hydraulics. Players take control of authentic high-caliber machine guns in either helicopters or Humvee vehicles. And the realism is sort of accentuated tenfold simply because of the physicality of the experience. The hydraulics extend to the human body an authenticity that could never be duplicated with conventional video gameplay. Rather than sitting comfortably at home with a stable keyboard and controller, the gamer is literally thrown around in the simulator. Instead of having perfect mastery over his mouse, the guns jump up and down and recoil with powerful kickbacks. Sometimes players even complain of bruises from the rides, from the guns and from the rides. So this mixing of reality and fantasy and body physicality catapults the player into an all-time gameplay high. It conveys the confusion and the chaos and terror of a Black Hawk Down scenario, but at the same time, the game experience winds down, and then they are actually debriefed, and they meet with real heroes and real soldiers. Now, I just want to finish off by showing you the latest incarnation of this virtual experience. It was just opened about 6 months ago or 7 months ago in Philadelphia, but I'm not sure if it's going to work. This is the same type of experience. It's called the Virtual Army experience, but unlike its mobile cousin, it's situated in a suburban mall outside of Philadelphia, and it's about the same size as the other one, but it's like a department store. It's huge, and so this is in a fixed position, and so kids can come and they can play games, and they can actually take part in the simulator rides if they're over 13.
We're going to go ahead and talk to a few folks regarding all the great things and all the fun stuff that they have to offer with all the interactive experiences. Let's go take a look. What are you guys waiting in line for right now?
The Humvee virtual reality.
And is this the first time you're trying the Humvee simulation?
Yeah.
Are you guys excited about it? Have you guys ever ridden a Humvee before? So you guys are waiting in line for the Apache. Is this the first time you guys have tried the simulator?
No, we just got finished with a simulator where
Okay, which one have you tried already?
the Humvee.
Okay, how'd you like the Hummer? Have you guys ever did a simulation for an Apache before? What's the most enticing interactive experience here?
I say all the technology, new technology they have here.
Okay, sorry. Also, in this exhibition or this place, you can find what's known as the Career Navigator. And the Career Navigator is used for charting the various types of jobs that the Army offers. Not only telling you the different types of jobs that are offered, but showing you the relative pay scales, as well as it being complete with I'm not sure if this is going to work, with video bios from people who actually work in the field. I don't think it's going to work for some reason because anyways. So this latest incarnation of the Virtual Army game is very interesting because what both of these places do is they take the power of game space as a private space and they extend it into a public arena, therefore sort of enforcing a sense of collectivity and community. So I'm going to just skip to the end of my presentation and sort of give you an idea of why I feel that these places are important for the American Army. Well, if you look at a breakdown of the actual amount of soldiers that exist in the US, they represent less than 1% of the population. And if you break down the numbers, what you find is the bulk are the Marines at about 1 million, and then Navy and Air Force are about roughly 500,000, and then Army makes up the rest. Now, stationed overseas soldiers are around 500,000, but actual ones that actually are combat trained are about 40,000. And in terms of recruitment, this was data that I got from 204. It shows that the highest level of success for recruitment takes place between the ages of 16 to 18. As soon as the age drops to 19, the recruitment level starts to go down significantly to 24, which means it becomes practically nil. So what that means for recruiters is that if they don't get them at this age, then there's a good chance that they won't make it to this part, because psychologists have sort of done recent sort of tests on the human brain, and that frontal region of the human brain, which is responsible for making logical choices without emotion, it doesn't fully mature, they found out, until after 18. So this is perhaps, and so now they're starting to realize that perhaps maybe someone really is an adult until they're 19 or 20 years old. So the fascination with the games are at this age. And I think, you know, militainment has been going on, as you saw, from when I was a child. It's just that it's become more attuned to where to find its source. And so video games as a form of new media offer a very vital way to sort of shape sort of an ideology and a disposition to joining America's army. I think they found out that recently that around 29 or 30% of the people who play this game and go to these places are sort of, they express the same views as those of the US military. So in many ways I think that it is a tool of indoctrination, but in terms of it being violent and making people violent, I would not be able to because I'm sort of, I think that's a very polemic argument. I think people are violent for other reasons.